Her head dropped onto my shoulder like it belonged there, heavy with the kind of weight that comes from a world cracking open. Tears soaked through my shirt, warm and insistent, her breaths shuddering against my neck. I caught the faint scent of her shampoo, lavender from the fields we used to hike. My heart raced, pounding like boots on dry earth, even though this was supposed to be just friendship. Clara had dated men her whole life, steady and sure. But right now, her grief felt like a claim I couldn't shake. That pull stirred something hidden, deep as canyon roots. I held her still, but inside, everything shifted. To understand how we got here, I need to go back. To the quiet start of us, before her breakup tore the ground from under her feet. We met in that small-town coffee shop on the edge of the ranch lands, the kind of place where the air always carried the bite of fresh ground beans mixed with dust from the road. I was nursing a black coffee after a long morning mending fences on my family's spread, my hands still rough from the wire. Clara walked in with that confident stride, like she owned the uneven wooden floors, her boots scuffing lightly as she ordered a latte with extra foam. She glanced my way, smiled easy, and asked if the stool next to me was taken. It wasn't. We started talking about the trails out back of town, the ones that wound up through the scrub oak and pine, where the air thinned and you could see the whole valley laid out like a promise. From there, it snowballed. We'd meet up for hikes after her shifts at the feed store, her laugh cutting through the wind like a clear bell. Clara moved like she was part of the land, long legs, eating up the miles, always pointing out the wildflowers or the hawk circling overhead. She had this circle of guy friends from high school, the ones who'd linger at the diner or the bar, swapping stories over beers. And dates. There were always dates. She'd mention them offhand, some ranch hand or mechanic with a truck and a grin, her eyes lighting up just enough to remind me of the lines she drew so clean. But on those trails, it was just us, the sun slanting through the branches, catching her hair in the threads of gold. I'd steal glances at her hands, calloused from helping her dad with the horses, strong and sure as they gripped a water bottle or brushed sweat from her brow. Those evenings stretched out quiet and full. We'd end up at my cabin sometimes, the one tucked against the hillside with the creek running nearby. Porch swings creaking under us as the light faded, talking about dreams that felt too big for this town. She wanted to expand the family ranch, breed better stock, maybe even open a bed and breakfast for city folks craving real air. I listened, nodding, sharing bits of my own, wanting to build something lasting, away from the whispers that followed a woman living alone. Family pressures weighed on her heavy. Her folks expected grandkids, a ring from one of those steady guys. The path laid out like fence posts in a straight line. They don't get it, she'd say, kicking at the dirt. It's not that simple. I'd agree, my chest tight, because for me, nothing had ever been simple. Trust built slow, like layers of sediment in the riverbed. Late nights, after a shared meal of stew from the pot, we'd sit by the fire pit outside, embers popping soft. She'd open up about the weight of expectations, how her mom clipped bridal magazines like hints, how her sister had settled so young. I shared my own ghosts, nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever fit the mold they all seemed to pour. But I kept the deeper truths locked, the way my gaze lingered on the curve of her neck when she laughed, or how the firelight played across her skin. It was in those moments the first hint cracked through. A goodbye hug after one of our evenings, her arms wrapping tight, body pressing close for a beat, too long. Her warmth seeped in, like sun on chilled earth, and my pulse thudded hard. I pulled back first, mumbling about the early morning, but that pull stayed, rooting deep. Clara's world kept spinning with its straight edges. She threw herself into community events, the county fair, church potlucks, always the one organizing, drawing people in with that easy charm. I'd tag along, content in the background, watching her navigate the crowd, her hand brushing mine, accidental in the press of bodies. But then he showed up, Ryan, with his broad shoulders and plans for a future that looked picture perfect on paper. They met at a barn dance, sparks flying quick as summer lightning. She lit up telling me about him, the way he'd fixed her truck without a word, talked about buying land adjacent to her folks. It solidified everything. The path she'd always walked, the one that tested my silence like a taut wire. I smiled through it, forcing banter at group hangs around bonfires, but inside, the want twisted sharper. How long could I keep pretending this was enough? Ryan fit into Clara's life like a well-oiled gate, swinging open without a creak. He was charming in that rancher way, tall with hands rough from hauling hay bales, a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes when he joked about the weather turning. They started dating steady after that barn dance, and he'd talk big about the future, combining their spreads, building a house with a wraparound porch, kids running underfoot by the time they hit 30. It all sounded solid, the kind of plan that made her folks nod approval at Sunday dinners. But there was a distance in him, like he kept the deeper parts locked behind those plans. Conversations with Clara never dug past the surface. No late-night unraveling of doubts, just nods and practical talk about feed prices or truck repairs. She'd come back from dates glowing, but I'd catch the flicker in her eyes, like she was waiting for something more to break through. Our group hangs kept rolling, the usual crowd gathering. At the old fire pit behind the diner or out on someone's back 40, Ryan slotted in easy, cracking open beers and telling stories about his last roundup, his arms slung casual around Clara's shoulders. She'd lean into him, laughing that bright sound, her face lit by the flames. I forced smiles, tossing in banter about the trails we'd hiked or the coffee that always burned at the shop. You two look like you stepped out of a catalog, I'd say, keeping it light, while my gut twisted watching her hand rest on his knee. The guys ribbed him about settling down, and he'd grin, pulling her closer, but I'd hang back by the cooler, pretending to fiddle with the ice. Nights like that stretched long, the smoke curling up into the stars, and I'd drive home alone, the cab of my truck too quiet, replaying the way she'd glance my way now and then, like checking if I was still there. Those moments alone with her didn't stop, though. They just carried a new edge. Mornings, she'd swing by my cabin for porch coffee, the mug steaming in the chill air before the sun crested the ridge. We'd sit on the steps, legs stretched out, talking about nothing much at first, the deer tracks by the creek, how the wild roses were blooming early, but she'd vent the small frustrations, her voice dropping low. Ryan's great, but he just plans everything. Like, what if I want to change course? Her fingers would trace the grain of the wood railing, and my chest would tighten, a slow squeeze, like wire pulling taut. I'd nod, sipping slow, fighting the urge to reach over and cover her hand with mine. You deserve someone who listens to the detours, I'd say careful, watching her eyes meet mine for a beat. Too long before she looked away, stirring her coffee with a stick. One weekend, she called me out to the family ranch to help fix a fence that had buckled under a winter storm. The sun beat down hard, turning the air thick with dust and the tang of creosote. We worked side by side, me hammering posts while she strung the wire, sweat tracing lines down our necks, mixing with the red earth that clung to our skin. Her shirt stuck to her back, and she'd wipe her brow with the back of her arm, leaving streaks like war paint. Ryan was supposed to come, but he bailed for some meeting about land, always those plans pulling him away. "Just us, then," she said, handing me a post driver, her grin dusty, but real. We fell into rhythm, the clang of metal echoing across the pasture, our bodies brushing in the close work, shoulder to shoulder when we lifted a rail, her hip bumping mine as we stepped back to check the line. The labor felt good, grounding, like shaking loose the knots inside me, but being that near her stirred the air between us, heavy as the heat. Tension built in those small collisions. Stacking tools at the end of the day, our fingers brushed accidental over a coil of wire. Rough skin on rough skin, lingering just a second before she pulled back slow. Not immediate like it should have been. Her eyes flicked to mine, a question there, or maybe just the sun playing tricks, and my pulse thudded like a mallet on wood. "Thanks for this," she murmured, flexing her hand as if testing the feel, and I nodded, throat dry, stacking faster to break the moment. We drove back in her truck, windows down, wind whipping the dust from our clothes, but that touch hung, electric as a storm building on the horizon. Cracks started showing in their thing, subtle at first, like how she'd linger longer at my place after group nights, or text me mid-afternoon about nothing, Ryan's name fading from her stories. One evening over that porch coffee, she admitted he canceled another date for work, her voice edged with something sharper than before. It's like I'm fitting into his plans, not building ours. She confided more, leaning close, the words spilling like water over stones, and I listened, heart pounding, knowing this pull was testing everything. Those cracks widened fast. One night, my phone buzzed late, the screen glowing sharp in the dark cabin. Clara's name. I answered, and her voice broke through, ragged like torn fence wire. He's gone. He just left. Words tumbled out, accusations flying from both sides, his sudden packing, the way he'd said it wasn't working, that her doubts were dragging him down. She'd pushed back, voice rising about his distance, the plans that never included her real wants. It ended in shouts, his truck peeling out down her gravel drive, taillights fading into the black. She was gasping now, the phone pressed close like holding on could stop the spin. I was already pulling on boots, keys in hand. I'm coming. Stay put. The drive blurred, headlights cutting through the pitch, my knuckles white on the wheel. Her place sat dark at the edge of town, porch light off like she'd forgotten to flip it. I knocked soft, then louder, and the door creaked open. She stood there, eyes red-rimmed, face streaked from hours of tears tracking down. No words. She just turned, shuffled back to the living room, curled up on the couch like a wounded animal, knees to chest, arms wrapped tight. The air hung heavy with salt, and the faint bite of her cooling tea on the side table. I crossed the room, sat beside her, close, but not touching, offered my shoulder without a sound. Just a tilt of my head, she collapsed into me then, body heavy with loss, head dropping onto my shoulder like it belonged there. The weight pressed real, sinking through my shirt, her frame shuddering against mine. Tears soaked the fabric, warm and insistent, seeping down to skin. I felt the salt sting faint on my collarbone, her breaths coming in hitches that rattled her ribs. Her grip clutched my arm like an anchor in floodwater, fingers digging in, holding fast as if I'd vanish. The faint scent of her shampoo rose, lavender from those old trail days, mixing with the raw edge of grief. My heart thudded steady, a counterpoint to her shakes, but inside, restraint pulled taut. I stroked her hair gently, fingers threading slow through the tangles, careful not to pull closer, not to let my hand linger on her back. It's okay, I whispered, voice low as creek murmur. Let it out. I've got you. Words fell simple, comforts I'd heard in my own hard times, but saying them to her cracked something in me, the want rising like dust after rain. She didn't speak much, just sobbed into the crook of my neck, body curling tighter, one leg thrown over mine, accidental in the press. The couch springs groaned under us, the room dim with just the hall light spilling in. I held still, arm around her loose, fighting the urge to wrap full, to draw her in until the lines blurred. This was grief, pure and jagged, not the place for my hidden pull. But her warmth seeped through, her pulse sinking faint with mine, and the air thickened, unspoken, time stretched, her cries easing to sniffles, breaths evening out against my skin. I kept stroking, slow circles on her scalp, whispering fragments, "You're strong, this passes," until her grip loosened, exhaustion pulling her under. When she finally stirred, eyes puffy but clear, she lifted her head slow, wiping her face with her sleeve. "Sorry," she mumbled, voice thick. I didn't know who else. No need for sorry. I stood, fetched a glass of water from the kitchen, handed it over with a nod. She sipped, then set it down, looking small in the oversized sweater she'd thrown on. "Stay?" she asked, simple as that. I nodded again, settling back, but sleep didn't come easy for me. Lay there on the edge of the couch, her form close, replaying the weight of her against me, the way grief had stripped her bare. Days blurred after that, lines softening under the demand of her hurt. She'd show up at my cabin unannounced, duffel in hand, eyes shadowed from restless nights. Grief needed constant presence, pulling us into a rhythm of shared silences and small tasks. Brewing coffee at dawn, her crashing on the spare bed or the couch when the dark pressed too hard. I didn't question it, just made space, the pull deepening with every quiet hour. That rhythm settled in like dust after a windstorm, fine and unavoidable. Clara would arrive as the light faded, her truck crunching gravel outside the cabin, duffel slung over her shoulder. She'd drop it by the door without a word, eyes tracing the floorboards until I nodded toward the fire pit. We'd build it together, me stacking the split logs from the woodpile, her crumpling newspaper for kindling, hands brushing in the chill evening air. The flames caught slow, crackling as they climbed, casting shadows that danced across her face. Words stayed sparse those nights, but heavy, like stones in a pocket you forget until they weigh you down. We'd sit on the old logs we'd dragged over, knees close, staring into the orange glow. The silence wrapped us, broken only by the pop of sap or the distant call of a coyote. She'd lean back, sometimes arms around her knees, and ask about love in that quiet way, voice threading through the smoke. What does it feel like, really, when it's right? Her eyes stayed on the fire, but I felt the question pull at me, sharp as a hook. I'd deflect careful, poking the embers with a stick, sparks lifting like fireflies. Like coming home after a long ride, I guess. Steady, not flashy. Truth twisted in my gut. For me, it had always been her, that pull I'd buried deep since those first hikes. But this wasn't the time to name it. Her grief still hung raw, and I wouldn't be the one to tangle it further. Protectiveness swelled instead, a wall I built higher with every unanswered ache in her voice. Mornings brought their own routines, intimate as shared breath. I'd wake early, the cabin cool with dawn seeping through the cracks, and start the kettle on the wood stove. Clara would stir from the spare room, hair tousled, padding out in socks that mismatched. She'd borrow my flannel from the hook by the door, the blue one, soft from years of wear, pulling it over her tank top for warmth, the sleeves swallowing her hands. It smelled of pine and earth from my last chop. Now mixed with her, we'd brew tea strong, chamomile if her eyes were still puffy, the steam rising thick as we sat at the scarred table. Mugs warmed our palms, and she'd sip slow, watching the mist curl. "Thanks for this," she'd say soft, fingers tracing the handle, and I'd nod. Throat tight. Those moments cracked my walls, her vulnerability seeping in like rain through slate. Want mixed with the need to shield her, a storm building quiet inside me. I wanted to reach across, tuck a strand behind her ear, but held back, stacking plates instead, the clink loud in the hush. Days folded into that pattern, her stays stretching longer. She'd help with chores when the grief eased enough, mucking the small stable behind the cabin, where I kept my horse, or splitting kindling with the axe, her swing steady but slower than before. Sweat would bead on her forehead, and she'd pause, leaning on the handle, eyes distant. I'd hand her water from the pump, our fingers meeting brief over the tin cup, and that electricity hummed, unspoken. Evenings by the fire brought subtle shifts. Hugs goodbye turned longer, her arms lingering around my waist after a shared laugh over some small thing, a rabbit darting through the brush or the way the stars pricked clear overhead. She'd pull back slow, eyes meeting mine in the firelight, holding a beat too long, like testing the air between us. The unspoken hung there, thick as the smoke, her breath sinking with mine in the quiet. One night, the fire burned low, embers glowing red. Clara shifted closer on the log, shoulder brushing mine, the flannel draped loose over her knees. She stared into the coals, voice dropping lower than usual. "It's not just him, you know. The hurt goes deeper." I waited, stick still in my hand, heart thudding like hooves on hardpack. She admitted it then, feeling lost beyond the breakup, like pieces of her life had never fit right. The path she'd walked feeling borrowed. Words spilled halting, about doubts she'd shoved down, the weight of always saying yes to what everyone expected. I listened, firelight flickering on her face, the vulnerability cracking wider. My own walls trembled, want surging fierce, but I kept steady, hand resting near hers on the wood. That confession deepened everything, pulling us toward questions neither had voiced yet. That pull toward unvoiced questions tugged us out one afternoon, the cabin walls feeling too close after days of circling the same silences. Clara suggested a drive, her voice casual but edged, like she needed the road to loosen whatever knotted inside. We piled into her truck, the engine rumbling low as we hit the back roads, winding through the scrub and sagebrush. Windows down, wind whipping fierce, carrying the dry scent of juniper and sun-baked earth. She gripped the wheel tight, knuckles pale against the faded leather, eyes fixed on the horizon where the ridges folded into each other like old hands. The radio stayed off, just the rush of air and the occasional rattle of gravel under tires. "I need to get this out," she said finally, voice cutting through the gusts, probing like a stick testing shallow water. We talked in fits, the miles unspooling her words. She admitted the doubts about men, how they'd always felt like fittings in a script she hadn't written, dates that checked boxes, touches that never sparked deeper than surface. "It's like I followed the lines because that's what you do here," she said, glancing my way, the wind tangling her hair across her face. Family expectations weighed heavy in her telling, her dad's quiet nods at church, her mom's clippings of engagement stories from the local paper, the whole town script of rings and babies by 25. She'd played it straight, letter perfect. But now the edges frayed, the path feeling less like home and more like a borrowed coat, tight across the shoulders. Her voice cracked on that, the truck swerving slight as she blinked hard against the dust. I listened, the wind buffeting us, my heart pounding like a hammer on anvil, steady but fierce. The pull in me surged, but I kept it reined, nodding into the roar. When she paused, the quiet stretched. I shared vague pieces of my own path, nights alone on the ridge, staring at stars that didn't judge, the slow carve of figuring who I was without the town's map. "Sometimes you have to walk your own trail," I said, keeping it light, no names for the feelings that had shaped me, the women I'd loved, quiet in the shadows of this land. No spilling the truth that she'd been the horizon I'd chased longest. She nodded, eyes flicking to mine, the wind easing as the road climbed. "Yeah, but what if the trail leads somewhere you never planned?" Her words hung, probing deeper, and my chest tightened, the air between us thickening like heat rising off blacktop. We pulled over at the overlook, where the valley dropped away sharp, layers of canyon red and gold stretching to the haze. The truck ticked cooling, wind dying to a whisper through the scrub. She turned in the seat, facing me full, her knee brushing mine in the cab's close space. "Tell me more about that trail of yours," she pressed, hand landing on my knee for emphasis, warm through denim, fingers pressing light but sure. It lingered there, a physical anchor, her thumb tracing absent a small circle that sent heat crawling up my leg. I swallowed, heart thudding visible under my shirt, the overlook's vastness mocking the small space we filled. Her eyes held mine, searching, the sun slanting gold across her cheekbones, and for a beat, the world narrowed to that touch, the unspoken questions blooming like thunderheads. Tension built in the silence that followed, her hand still on my knee, breaths sinking slow, in and out with the faint rustle of wind in the pines below. She leaned in then, close enough I felt the warmth of her skin, the faint salt of her from the drive, her lips parting like she might bridge the gap. My pulse roared, body leaning instinctive, the air electric as a wire fence before storm, but she pulled back sudden, hand lifting, eyes dropping to the dash. "Sorry, just thinking." The moment snapped, leaving the cab cooler, her fingers flexing on the wheel as she started the engine again. We drove on, words sparse, but that lean hung between us, a thread pulled taut. Clouds gathered heavy by late afternoon, the sky bruising purple over the ridges. Rain hit sudden as we neared the cabin, sheets slamming the windshield, wipers slapping frantic. The storm stranded us closer, thunder rumbling deep, forcing us inside where the talk turned raw, desires unspoken rising like floodwater against the walls. Word count, 800. Rain hammered the cabin roof like fists on tin, relentless, drowning the world outside. We barely made it in before the downpour hit full, slamming the door against the frame as thunder rolled deep through the ridges. Water streamed from our clothes, pooling on the worn floorboards, the air turning thick with the scent of wet earth and pine. Clara shivered, arms crossed tight, her hair plastered dark against her neck. I grabbed towels from the linen shelf, handed her one, and we rubbed down quick, the friction warming skin chilled by the storm. Power flickered once, twice, then cut out sharp, leaving the room swallowed in gray. I lit candles from the kitchen drawer, their flames guttering unsteady, casting wavering light across the walls. We settled by the hearth, the fire we'd built earlier still holding embers, but the chill seeped in anyway. Her face flickered in the dim, shadows playing over the hollows under her eyes, the candle glow softening the lines grief had carved. She pulled her knees up, the damp flannel clinging to her shoulders, and stared into the low flames. Thunder cracked close, shaking the windows, and she flinched, breath catching. "This storm feels like everything right now," she said, voice low, threaded with something rawer than the rain. Tears started then, silent at first, tracking down her cheeks to drip onto her hands. Not the heaving sobs from the breakup night, but steady, like a leak in a roof you can't patch. I shifted closer on the rug, the wool rough under my palms, but didn't touch. "It's okay," I murmured, watching her curl tighter. She shook her head, wiping at her face with the towel's edge. "It's not just Ryan, it's years, pretending things fit when they never did." Her words hung, heavy as the downpour, the candles spitting soft in the draft. She unfolded slow, eyes meeting mine across the flickering space, vulnerability cracking wide. I followed the script, dates, plans, the whole straight line, but it chafed, like boots too small. And now, without it, I don't know the shape of me. The admission pulled at me, sharp as barbed wire, snagging skin. Rain lashed harder, wind howling through the eaves, but inside, the air stilled, charged. She reached out then, hand trembling slight, and touched my face, fingers cool from the storm, tracing the line of my jaw, tentative, like testing if I'd pull away. Her palm settled against my cheek, thumb brushing the corner of my mouth, the contact sending heat blooming deep in my chest. "You," she whispered, voice breaking on the word. "This pull toward you, it confuses everything. Like I've been looking at you wrong all this time, seeing friend when something else stares back." Her eyes held mine, wide in the candlelight, fear and want mingling there, raw as the thunder outside. My breath caught, the world narrowing to her hand on my skin, the faint salt of her tears lingering in the air. Years of hidden glances, buried aches, surfaced in that touch, the unspoken finally voiced. I covered her hand with mine, holding it steady against my face, my voice coming even, like gravel under tires. I felt it too, slow, building like canyon walls over time, layer by layer until you can't deny the depth. Confession spilled quiet, no rush, just truth carved from the quiet hours we'd shared. Loved you since those first trails, the way you moved through the world, sure, but searching. Kept it locked because you had your path and I wouldn't bend yours. Her breath hitched, fingers pressing firmer, eyes searching mine like mapping unfamiliar land. The candles flickered, throwing gold across her features, rain a steady roar beyond the walls. She leaned in, slow, the space between us shrinking to nothing, her forehead resting against mine first, breaths mingling warm and uneven. The kiss came tentative, lips brushing soft, tasting salt from her tears and the clean bite of rain on her skin. Her mouth moved, hesitant, exploring, and I met it gentle, hand sliding to the nape of her neck, fingers threading into damp hair, the world narrowed to her warmth, the press of her body shifting closer on the rug, knees bumping, flannel brushing my arm. Heat built slow, like embers catching, her hand cupping my face still, the other finding my waist, pulling tentative. Thunder rolled distant now, but inside, everything thrummed, lips parting slight, the soft give of her against me, years of want uncoiling in that shared breath. She sighed into it, body relaxing inch by inch, the kiss deepening just enough to seal the shift, world fading to the flicker of candles and the rain's hush. We pulled back slow, foreheads touching again, her eyes fluttering open to meet mine, wide with wonder and a touch of fear. That was real, she breathed, hand dropping to my shoulder, fingers flexing like anchoring. I nodded, thumb tracing her cheek, wiping the last tear track. Real as the storm outside. Laughter bubbled soft from her, shaky, breaking the tension like sunlight after clouds. We sat there, tangled close, the fire popping low, rain easing to a patter. Awkward joy settled in, her shifting to lean against me, head on my shoulder by choice now, not crisis, my arm around her loose. Words came sparse, testing the new ground. What this meant for tomorrow, the town, her family. But navigating felt possible, the truth between us a bridge over the flood. Morning would bring light on this, awkward edges smoothing with the dawn. Morning broke clear, sun slanting through the cabin windows like a promise scrubbed clean. Clara stirred first, her body still tangled with mine on the rug, flannel twisted around her waist. She lifted her head, eyes meeting mine soft in the light, a small smile tugging her lips. No words at first, just the shift of her hand finding mine, fingers lacing easy like they'd always known the shape. We rose slow, coffee brewing on the stove, steam curling thick as we moved through the kitchen. That first day carried awkward joy, brushing teeth side by side at the sink, her shoulder bumping mine deliberate now, laughter bubbling when she spilled sugar across the counter. New territory, she said, sweeping it up, her gaze holding mine warm. I nodded, heart steady, the storm's rawness giving way to something solid. Daily shifts came quiet, weaving into the rhythm of ranch life. Walks along the creek trail turned different, her hand slipping into mine as we stepped over roots, palms warm against the cool morning air. The earth crunched under our boots, wild grasses brushing our legs, and she'd squeeze my fingers light when a bird called sharp overhead. No rush, just the feel of her beside me, the way her thumb traced absent circles on my skin. Chores shared the same ease, mucking the stable together, her pitchfork clanging next to mine, sweat beading on her neck as we worked. Easy touches followed, her wiping dirt from my cheek with her thumb, lingering to cup my face, or my hand on her lower back as we hauled feed sacks, the contact grounding like fence posts in firm soil. Evenings we'd cook side by side, her chopping onions while I stirred the pot, hips brushing in the narrow space, sparks jumping quiet but sure. The cabin felt fuller, walls echoing with our shared breath, the want no longer hidden but folded into every glance. Small-town stares hit soon enough, testing the new ground. We'd walk into the coffee shop hand in hand, the bell jingling over the door, and heads would turn slow, conversations dipping like wind dying in the scrub. Old-timers at the counter paused, mid-sip, eyes flicking from our laced fingers to Clara's face, then away, quick. Whispers followed us out, bits caught on the wind about that phase or poor Ryan's loss, but she held my hand tighter, chin up like facing a stiff breeze. At the feed store, where she still worked shifts, folks nodded polite, but cool. Questions veiled in small talk. Heard you two are close these days. She'd smile steady, closer than ever, and I'd wait by the truck, engine idling, pride swelling quiet at her resilience. Her family pressed harder, Sunday dinner invites turning tense, her dad clearing his throat over pie, asking pointed about settling right. Mom's eyes would narrow, clippings of weddings stacked higher, but Clara pushed back gentle. This is right for me. Resilience grew in us both, roots digging deeper against the pull of old expectations, our bond a quiet defiance in the face of stares. Deeper talks unfolded in those stolen hours, her bisexuality emerging like dawnlight creeping over the ridge. We'd sit on the porch, after dark, stars pricking the sky, her head on my shoulder as crickets hummed low. It's not just you, she'd say, voice threading soft. Men, women, it's the connection that pulls, but I never saw it clear till now. Doubts spilled about the years she'd boxed herself in, following the straight script because it fit the town's frame, not her heart. I'd listen, patient as a horse waiting out a storm, sharing bits of my own path, The women I'd loved in shadows, the slow acceptance that carved me steady. No savior role for me. I guided light, asking questions that let her map her own truth. What feels like home? I'd prompt, hand on her knee, and she'd lean in, eyes bright, piecing it together word by word. Nights lightened with promise. No more heavy grief shadowing her eyes, but a glow building, laughter easier, touches lingering longer. The air between us hummed content, the pull no longer a storm but a steady wind carrying us forward. That final intimacy sealed it one dusk on the porch, the sky bleeding orange over the hills. We sat close, her head on my shoulder by choice, not crisis, the weight, familiar now, warm and right. Her hand rested on my thigh, fingers drumming soft to the rhythm of the fading light, silence wrapping us like a shared blanket. No tears, just the quiet truth of us, built from hikes and heartaches, emerging whole. The door to our future swung open wide, her hand firm in mine, the silence between us now an invitation, warm as evening sun on stone. If this quiet pull resonates with you, share your story below. Subscribe for more tales of finding truth in the everyday.